Ginger Baker.
Ginger Baker. He was just a gimmick. He was just a gimmick. But it was phenomenal. But okay, not of the era. But we're just showing the fact that we actually listened to all this stuff, and
Yeah.
it was influences for us in many ways. But yeah, those gimmicks go back to the original boy band.
Ginger Baker's funny because after he played with Cream, he ended up moving to, I believe, Africa for a year. I think it was Africa for a year, and he really absorbed some of those African polyrhythms. And you listen to some of the old Cream records, and you don't really hear any of that stuff. You don't hear the technical. You don't hear anything there. And so I always question that. A super group. I see Eric Clapton. I understand Jack Bruce. I don't know about super group, but he's pretty good. And Baker. But then he came when he had this like resurgence. He was a farmer for a while, and then something brought him back into the drums. And when he came back into the drums, he was on fire. He is something about him. And I remember watching a video before he passed away. He was doing stuff that, to this day, I don't know how he did it. Just time field. Dream Theater does all this time. They'll take a simple 4/4. But remember, you could play, instead of 4 bars of 4, you could play, anything that will line up to that 16. In the case of triplets, anything that'll line up to that 12. So, 3 bars of 4 is the same as 4 bars of 3. If you think of it like that, and in his case, where he's playing 6/8 rhythms, derived from Africa, if you take a bar of 12, you can have, here's some math for you, groups of 2, groups of 4, groups of 3, groups of 6. You can have all these different polyrhythms that will actually line up. And he was doing it all. Each one of his limbs were doing a different signature. And it was like,
it's amazing.
What planet are you on?
That's just something that I'll sometimes watch the the drum videos, and my youngest is playing now, and yeah, that ability to separate all your limbs, it's just a talent. And I've seen you do it, and there's things that just your jaw drops, and then when you're looking at these folks and knowing how accomplished you are as a player, and yeah, there are some otherworldly people out there, man. Speaking of, I keep running into dates because my memory is terrible. I had done a spot or a little segment on Eddie Van Halen, and I realized it had been 2 years, 2.5 years. So Neil Peart.
Yep.
It seems as though it took far too long for like mainstream to kind of catch up with Rush as players. Yeah. But what are your thoughts on Neil just in general? Because he seemed to have this amazing ability to have independence in everything that he was doing as well.
Oh, no question about it. I think Neil Peart is definitely one of the all-time greatest. Greatest. I don't think he's the greatest. There's hard to say the greatest, but definitely one of them. I think the thing about him is the way he approached the song. And he wasn't your typical, I'm going to play this in the verse, I'm going to play this in the chorus, I'm going to play this he wasn't a typical, he built the song up very similar to someone writes or tells a story where, that climax is there, and however I get to that climax, and then it comes down. And his solos were that way too. He would, start very gradual, come up and come down. But, when he would actually create a drum part, the verse would be somewhat simple.
Mm-hmm.
The second verse would be that first simple drum beat with one little thing that will make it a little better.
A little something added there.
Something. And then, that third verse is going to be all, nothing hold back, crazy as anything, but still reminiscent of that first verse. A good example would be like Subdivision.
Oh, it builds. It does.
If you go right down the line, the third verse is like, oh my God, what planet are you on? How amazing are you? And I think that's just little flourishes that he was doing. The third verse had these, I'd have to think, I have to go through the song in my mind, but I remember that there were some fills there that were like, he couldn't have played that in the beginning because it told a story. And you could only say that fill at this one particular part. So I think, and it carries over to his writing. As you know, he wrote several books. So I mean, I think his drumming, there was a good parallel between his drumming and his writing. You know.
So if I'm hearing you correctly, and it's the first time I think I've ever heard anyone articulate this, it was almost as though it's not necessarily another vocal line, but in a way, because you're saying storytelling, and it's enhancing what the lyrical content is, and that's why it has to be different at these. It's a melody into itself, but rhythmically.
Well, he wrote the lyrics, so
right.
He was very, he lived these lyrics. I mean, the lyrics that he wrote were, they were his. I mean, so I think he had a little impartiality to these lyrics, but I'm also thinking dynamically. I mean, he was able to dynamically bring the song where it goes. I mean, you're going to hit the snare drum, you're going to hit the snare drum. You're going to get that same, that intensity from the first hit to the last hit. But I think his songwriting ability on the drums, you saw that storytelling. That makes sense.
It does. Yeah.
As
soon as you said it, it kind of clicked because of just the kind of player that he is. I'd say that Bonham was a little bit like that too, but without having been the primary songwriter, which obviously Neil was, and you're right about that. But I mean, Bonham was that kind of storyteller as well.
Well, yeah, I think there's a few of them that really, and then someone like, and how much I love Tommy Aldrich. He's anything but that. He just lays down the beat. You get what you get. Your verse 1 is the same as verse 4, and and it's very linear and not linear drumming, but linear in the sense that there's really no there's dynamics, but there's no peaks like where Peart really just made it very very, very. He was very conscious of when to push, when to pull, when to go high, when to go low. And I think that's what really made his drumming stand out. The fact that he could play, a 6-inch tom to a 30-inch floor tom, this like crazy bass drum over here, and he could play this thing at, lightning speed and go right. I mean, that's cool and dandy, but, a lot of people could do that. But again, we were talking about being a cerebral musician. I mean, he was very cerebral, and it was multi-layered. It wasn't just drumming. It was the package, I guess you can say.
Well, it is, because it still serves the song, and that's ultimately, so important, because there are people who can be so flashy, but it actually takes away from the song. It's like, you didn't need to do all of that there. It was really cool. I'm impressed, but that didn't necessarily lend itself to whatever story you were trying to tell. Right. But sometimes those are the bands that they're also doing kind of paint by number lyrics as well. There isn't necessarily an emotional resonance where someone like Neil Peart was an actual emotive storyteller, and people think, well, no, he just takes very clinical things. And I know early on it was like Ayn Rand kind of stuff, but he did draw upon his personal experiences, because the guy had some significant tragedies, and it comes through in the music. So it's just so impressive, and such a huge loss, and how many of the greats that we all came up with and respected and loved are gone now. And I guess there's just something about that kind of genius that lends itself to, going far too soon.
Well, there's, again, there's a mastery to what he did. There's no doubt about it, but it's not impossible. I don't think his drumming is, people cover Rush all the time. It's not unheard of. But I mean, no one will ever have that sense of dynamic that he had. That sense of, I don't know. Another example would be like Toto, like Jeff Porcaro.
Yeah.
When he passed away in '92, on paper, you see it written on paper. Rosanna's, not that complicated. Right hand, left hand, right hand, right hand. I mean, it's on paper, but to hear him play it, the groove, we can't even talk about it. It's just so deep. The right word?
No, because you always can tell, right? So there's a band that I love. I do. I enjoy them. People can go, well, they're not that good a band, and they'll be like, well, they're a fun band. Weezer, for example, right?
Yeah.
So sure. Weezer kind of had this whole covers record where they're doing the songs, and they're very good. They're very capable, but those kind of songs like Rosanna is transcendent. And people, well, it's pop. Well, Yes, it is, but it doesn't mean that pop can't be craftsmanship. And I mean,
No, of
those
course.
bands, Asia, Toto, like those kind of bands have these great players. And again, it
Yeah,
goes back to what we were saying with some of those other bands earlier. It's like these things are not exclusive to each other. Doesn't mean that you can't have a slickly polished, beautiful, catchy hook and be radio friendly and not be just
absolutely.
a sick player.
Right.
I don't know why people think that they have to be so separate. But I'm going to say I'm going to ask the next question, which is going to be total nerd out question here. Okay. So, what are your thoughts about playing with a click track?
Um, it's needed, but it's not needed. Now, let me explain. I think where you're going with it is the most important. For example, if you're in the studio and you're the first one laying down the tracks, I mean, there were multiple times when I've been in the studio and I have to lay down that because I know that there's going to be some kind of sequence going over it, or I'm playing over the sequence. That's happened multiple times in the studio. But I got to also say, I think you can't be a slave to it. When I practice, I have it going. When I practice, here's what I do. I practice the dance music. Remember those now hits? Remember
Yeah,
now
yeah,
7?
yeah,
I go and buy those because chances are a lot of those are loops, or a lot of those are some kind of hip hop stuff.
yeah.
Totally not what I'm playing with the band.
Oh, that's
Totally
interesting.
not what I'm even interested. But it's a drum loop and it's a computer aided. So I will go in that route. So to hear you click, 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 I won't go there. But um, I think there's a need for it when you're recording. But I like the push and pull. I mean,
Yeah.
that's me. I mean, um,
I'm sure you've
you
seen
know,
the videos where they've gone ahead and they've corrected songs, right? Have you
oh
seen
yeah,
these, right?
oh yeah,
And
yeah, yeah,
the perfect example is oh gosh, what song was it? It was one of the Led Zeppelin tunes, right? And John
yeah,
Bonham, just pure feel player, and they play it normally, right? And I don't know if it was "Fool in the Rain," I've read do doom
yeah,
do doom right,
yeah,
and I think they go and correct it, and it's like a different song. It sounds so
it's terrible.
sterile. It's just like
Yeah,
there's nothing passionate about it. The beauty is gone. It's
yeah.
just
There's a
completely
few.
stripped away.
Stone Temple Pilots is a good example of that, where we were talking about that tonight with Don and the band, where we played a couple of Stone Temple Pilots songs, and it's the feel. It's all about the push and pull. So, like, they say for Plush, dun, 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 you got this kind of like very slow, and even though the tempo doesn't change, there's an immediacy to the push for the verses,
Yeah,
and then or the choruses. And so, I mean, you could feel it. And I don't think you could achieve that if you were playing to a click, even though it probably is, I don't know, the tempo is probably right on the money. You can't achieve that same feel. I don't feel like you could.
no,
Another example is the ocean. I don't, do you know the ocean from Zeppelin? At
yeah, 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 yeah.
the very end, they go into a triplet fill at the very end, and I feel like it slows down. These fills, ba-da-da, 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 ba-da. I mean, if you had a click going, there's no way it.
Yeah,
Da-da,
yeah, you
da-da,
can't.
it just wouldn't go. So I think you need both.
I just, I think of one of the most either revered or maligned drummers, uh, Lars
Yeah,
Ulrich, and in the latter stages of the last few albums,
yeah,
it's been click track, it's been very specific, and I do think you lose something. You know what I mean?
yeah,
Those early Metallica records, there's just something so pure and real. And I think that, you do get to be a band of a certain level. It's almost expected that you're using all the latest and greatest of technology and that you have to
yeah,
do everything, quote unquote, professionally. And I think that, that's kind of unfortunate because so many of these bands that we've talked about are still creating new music, right? but I'm
Right.
wondering how many of them are fully